Hello everybody, welcome to the Boxing Science Podcast. This is a special episode on nutrition for boxing, and this is going to be delivered by our performance nutritionist, Lee Rickards.
First question on our Instagram Q&A were, are electrolytes needed? So there is no research showing that electrolytes improve performance alone. However, we do know that dehydration can impair performance. 2% dehydration can reduce cognitive performance as well as some physical performance markers. We know this from previous research from Mark Funnell down at Loughborough University and Whitbread et al.'s meta-analysis. However, I do like athletes to use electrolytes, especially in boxing and combat sports. And the reason for this is that many boxers do perform mildly dehydrated in training. So there is still a big misconception in the combat sporting world that water puts weight on. So to encourage thirst, electrolytes are ideal to be added to water before training, just to help try and maintain new hydration whilst training. All the performance decrements in the research studies is when participants basically start exercise dehydrated. So if we know that our athletes are starting exercise and training sessions in a euhydrated state, so being fully hydrated, that there is going to be less decrements in performance. So this is going to help improve their training performance, which hopefully they can take over to the ring. We know sodium, which is the main electrolyte needed, does retain fluid. So this can be ideal to have after training sessions, especially in the heat, or if you have done a long training session where you have lost a lot of fluid. So adding an electrolyte tablet, which is high in sodium, probably pre-exercise, but then also after exercise, can be a good strategy to use to help hydration. As we previously mentioned, that although there is no research showing that electrolytes improve performance, equally there is no research to show they don't impair performance. So it is still a good strategy to utilise, in my opinion, for most boxers. Electrolytes can be quite expensive to purchase. So a strategy which may be beneficial for those who maybe do not have the budget to use electrolytes is add a pinch of salt to some foods and have a glass of water with that, because the carbohydrates from the foods and then also the electrolytes from the table salt is going to slow that gastric emptying and just going to promote a euhydrated state. Or you could just make your normal electrolyte drink. So basically what you can do is you could maybe get some water and maybe some sugar-free cordial juice, and you could add around 1 gram of kind of rock salt or just some sea salt to that drink. And that would be roughly around 200 to 400 milligrams of sodium within that serving. And this is probably equal to an electrolyte tablet. Some electrolyte tablets do differ in terms of sodium content. You can get some higher sodium electrolyte tablets, which can help promote a greater fluid retention. Now, a good practical strategy to see if you are a salty sweater in training is to wear some dark clothing whilst you're training. And then after you have trained whilst your clothing is wet from sweat, just leave it to dry. Leave it to dry outside, maybe in the sun or just in a warm room, and then see if your dark clothing has got some salt marks. Clothing has got some salt marks. It probably shows that you are a salty sweater. So you possibly do need a higher sodium electrolyte tablet to help replace those fluid losses you have in training, but also potentially to use them pre-exercise to limit that effect of the loss of sodium in your sweat. The next question on our Instagram Q&A was nutritional advice for a 3-day tournament in amateur boxing. In terms of a 3-day tournament in amateur boxing, you're going to weigh in over multiple days, usually a Friday, Saturday and Sunday. It is really important that at the start of that fight week, we are close to our weigh-in weight. Ideally, we want most of our athletes to be at 2 to 3% of their fighting weight on the Monday before the competition at the weekend. And the reason we want this is so when we are weighing in on the Friday, we are basically on weight, and it does give us the ability to refuel and rehydrate after competition so we can make weight the next day without it being detrimental to our performance. We see so many amateur boxers who go into the tournament too far off weight, so then they have to dehydrate on the first day of the weigh-in, but then they're going to have to probably dehydrate to even a greater extent and not even refuel after the fight for the next day tournament. And this is going to be detrimental over that weekend. We want to be around 2 to 3% of their fight weight week before the amateur boxing tournament starts. Lead up to that weigh-in on the Friday, we want to reduce our carbohydrate intake slightly to around 2 to 3 grams per kilogram, possibly going towards 1 gram in the 2 days previous to that weigh-in. We want these carbohydrates to be low in fibre and low in weight. So in our fight camp diet, when we're having a plethora of kind of whole grain carbohydrates, which are high in volume, high in fiber. So something looking at like whole grain rice or some noodles and pasta. We want to reduce these foods. So we are reducing that unwanted weight in our stomach to help us lose weight. So some low fiber kind of carbohydrates, what we could have is maybe some basmati white rice. We could have some rice cakes with a bit of peanut butter and honey. Or we could have maybe some white toast with Nutella and a bit of maple syrup. So we're still getting some adequate carbohydrates into our system for training, but then also ready for our fight. After the weigh-in, we certainly probably want to have some drinks to help promote hydration. So adding some electrolytes to some water would be ideal. If you are fighting earlier on in the day, so if you are fighting at a low weight, having an isotonic energy drink, just such as a still Lucozade after the weigh-in, will be optimal because it's going to contain carbohydrates and it's going to contain electrolytes. And then we're wanting to snack on some low fiber, low weight carbohydrates. So as suggested previously, whether we could maybe get some rice cakes with jam on, some Rice Krispies with a tablespoon of maybe sugar on top, or a sliced banana with some maple syrup or jam. So what's happening there is we're just replacing carbohydrates of what we've cut out in the previous few days to help top up our blood glucose levels and muscle and liver glycogen, ready for when we fight. What many people go wrong is between the weigh-in and the fight, try and have a big carbohydrate meal, but then this is going to be quite detrimental to the following day's weigh-ins because it's going to be that high in volume and fiber, which is going to be slow to break down. So snacking little and often and just topping up your energy levels is going to be ideal. Having an energy gel before a bout, so probably around 30 minutes to 15 minutes before your bout whilst you're warming up, is going to help top up those blood sugar levels to help you perform for those 3 rounds at high intensity. Then between the fight, for when you win, to the next weigh-in, this is when we want to be quite strategic. So what I would say is there can be a trade-off between a refueling and rehydrating. What I would suggest is we want to make sure that we are still within that 1 to actually 2% of your weigh-in weight for the next day. I would say that dehydrating maybe 1 to 2% maximum is doable for most athletes and safe as long as you can rehydrate between the weigh-in and the fight the next day. So snacking on some kind of high glycemic, low fiber carbohydrates after the fight towards the weigh-in would be a good strategy to use. So what this could look like is after you've fought, you could maybe have a chocolate yuzu to help replace some glycogen, but also having some protein in there. Then maybe having a small snack of carbohydrates. This could be maybe some kind of gummy bears, or it could be just some fresh fruit such as some grapes or mango. So this is going to help replace some of that lost muscle glycogen. Then what I would say is possibly a few hours later, we can have kind of a good high energy dense meal, but still low in that volume. So this could look something like some basmati rice with maybe a salmon fillet and some olive oil. It could be just some white pasta with a tomato-based sauce. This is going to help make sure we've got enough energy for the following competition the next day. Then when we wake up following day, make sure we're within that 2% of that weight we need to weigh in. If so, we can possibly do a bit of kind of careful dehydration, whether it's doing some shadow boxing or some skipping or maybe a light run just with a sweatsuit, just to lose a bit of that water weight what's needed. In terms of hydration, we want to try and limit, as I said, towards that 2% dehydration level. So we always want to be around that 2% of that fighting weight. Having water with electrolytes will be ideal for this, as well as maybe using some fresh fruit juices such as orange juice and apple juice, which is quite high in potassium and electrolyte and also does contain some carbohydrates. Throughout the day, we just want to repeat these for the next few days in the competition. And this will make sure that we do not balloon up in weight. So then each day making that weight is getting harder and harder, which is going to be detrimental to your performance. So to recap, I'd certainly say that on fight week, we want to be no more than 2 to 3% away from your fighting weight of that competition. If you are, I would certainly say that I think that you may struggle to make the following weigh-ins the following days, or even if you do, it's going to be detrimental to your performance. So this is why it's important that in the weeks and months following these amateur tournaments, that you are quite dedicated in terms of keeping your weight quite low towards your fighting weight. This is where I say if you are cutting just for a normal amateur bout, say 5-6% in the 1-2 weeks following before your competition, that when you do get to that multi-day tournament, you're probably going to struggle to make that weight. So it might be wise to move up that amateur weighing weight a couple of kilos to the next weight category. And I'll be sure that this will help improve your performance over the long term of the amateur season, for when you do get to those multi-day tournaments when there is quarterfinals, semi-finals and finals. The next question were, what are the best pre-fight meals? So in terms of a pre-fight meal, we want this to be quite custom to our athletes. So something what they've probably been having during their training camp. Last thing you want to do is have a new meal which your body's not used to then digest going into competition. We want these meals to be low in fibre, high GI carbohydrates, possibly contain some glucose and fructose because we know that's going to top up muscle and liver glycogen, but also going to reduce that GI distress. And also contain some electrolytes to help promote that hydration ready for the fight. So some examples could be a soy sauce chicken stir fry with some basmati white rice. It could be some white pasta with a tomato-based sauce, maybe with a bit of spinach, and adding a pinch of salt to that meal. It could be some rice pudding with a pinch of salt and some jam and a sliced up banana mixed in. Or it could be a white bagel or some white toast with maybe a tablespoon of peanut butter, a good drizzle of honey, and maybe a few chopped fresh fruit, such as a banana or maybe some low fibre kind of grapes or mango. We want this meal to probably be around, at the very least, 1 gram per kilogram of carbohydrates, up towards 2 to 3 grams per kilogram of carbohydrates, depending on how long you have between the fight. Now, many professional boxers that we work with like to have their meal quite light and quite far from the weigh-in because they don't like going into the ring feeling heavy. So usually we try and time this around 4 hours before their fight, and we want to try and get around 1.5 to 2 grams per kilogram of carbohydrates into their system ready for the fight. We certainly want to limit fat intake in this meal as well, because this is going to really slow that kind of gastric emptying. Trying to keep fat intake probably below 10 grams for in this meal is going to be certainly sufficient. And also limiting that fibre. We probably don't want any meals higher in fibre than probably 3 to 5 grams. So looking at your white rices, your white pastas, your white breads, even some kind of low fibre cereals such as Rice Krispies or even like your rice pudding is going to be optimal to have before you fight, around 3 to 4 hours before. Our next question on the Instagram Q&A was post-bone fracture nutrition. So bone fractures are quite common in combat sport athletes, especially around the hands and wrists. Now we know from previous research by Abby Smith-Ryan 2020 was that we certainly want to avoid a negative energy balance whilst we're recovering from a bone injury. And the reason for this is we know that low energy availability does impair bone health because it can help leak calcium out of the bone, which does reduce bone mineral density, which can lead to bone fractures. So we want to make sure that we are on either a normal or actually a slight positive energy balance. So you certainly don't want to be dieting whilst you have got a bone injury. Maintaining the energy balance is certainly required. Then in terms of the macronutrients containing within the energy balance, we certainly want a high protein intake. And we want this for 2 reasons. We want to maintain muscle mass around that injured area of where we have this bone fracture. Higher muscle mass is correlated to higher bone mineral density. So we're going to help repair that injury, but also make sure that we are retaining as much muscle mass as possible. Now, in terms of protein intake, we certainly want to be around 2.5 to 3 grams per kilogram of protein intake per day. Many people will reduce carbohydrate intake during whilst they're injured, thinking they're not expending much energy. However, we certainly don't want to reduce this by any large amounts. So still having some high fibre, good carbohydrates at main meals is certainly required to make sure that we are not on a negative energy balance. And then using just some healthy fats, so some essential fatty acids such as olive oils, omega-3 fish, which is going to help reduce that inflammation around that injured area, which can also help promote anabolism when it's combined with protein, is certainly going to be a good addition to your diets. In terms of supplementation, we certainly want to make sure that we are having a supplementation of vitamin D3. So around 2,000 to 4,000 IU per day whilst you're injured is certainly required, unless you are getting a lot of direct sunlight to your skin. Literally 90% of athletes we blood test, their hydroxy vitamin D levels in their blood are deficient or insufficient. So I would have no problem of literally making sure that most athletes do supplement with vitamin D3. You can use a calcium supplement, especially if you're not consuming many dairy foods. I like to encourage our athletes while they may have a bone fracture is to encourage 3 servings of dairy per day. And usually we do this whether it's some milk, like a pint of milk a day, some Greek yogurt, or some high protein fruit yogurt, or some low fat cheese into their meals, and having this 3 times per day. You can get a good calcium supplement from Healthspan Elite, which is called Calcium Complex, and this does contain some vitamin D and some vitamin K to help that absorption. So sometimes we do recommend athletes to have this 3 times per day. So you have 1 calcium tablet at breakfast, 1 calcium tablet at lunch, and 1 calcium tablet at dinner, just to make sure that we are getting sufficient calcium to our injured bones. The last supplement that we could potentially use is some collagen. Now, there is some research that collagen could help bone health because it is kind of the forming tissue in terms of collagen when we are producing new bone tissue. So having a collagen shot, certainly maybe 1 hour before you're doing any exercise in terms of rehabilitation, or just having it in the day in between some meals just to help increase that collagen turnover to get to our bone, could certainly be beneficial. So this is also something that I would potentially recommend for those athletes who do have a bone fracture. The final question on our Instagram Q&A was must-have supplements. 95 to 90% of supplements are not required if you have a healthy, balanced diet matching your energy demands of your training and also competition. However, if you are wanting to improve your performance and health, there is certain supplements which we do feel are beneficial. Now, there was a great paper by Graham Close and colleagues, which was food first, not food only. So showing that actually now there is certainly some supplements which are required in athletes. Now, the first supplement which I'd certainly recommend to everybody, as I've previously mentioned, the bone fracture, is vitamin D3. So having 2,000 to 4,000 IU of vitamin D3 per day can help improve health in terms of bone health. It can help reduce illness because having lower serum vitamin D levels is linked to higher risk of illness and infection. It can also help improve recovery. So there was a great study by Daniel Owens and colleagues which actually showed that having vitamin D levels below 75 nanomoles actually impaired recovery. So those who had over 75 nanomoles per litre of vitamin D3 had improved recovery after training and also from muscle damaging exercise. So it can help improve kind of strength and power performance. So there has been some studies actually showing improved jump performance by just supplementing with vitamin D3. So this is certainly a supplement I would recommend to everybody. Omega-3 is another supplement which I would probably recommend to everybody. Now, the reason for this is because most people do have a low omega-3 and fish intake. And there is some studies now actually it could probably improve anabolism when it's combined with muscle protein intake and help increase muscle mass, especially lean muscle mass. So you want probably around 3 to 4 grams of omega-3 per day, which is high in EPA and DHA. Now, most supplement brands are quite low in this. This is a key regulator of most potent effect of omega-3. So getting this in a good supplement brand such as Nutritionist or Healthspan Elite, where they do have higher EPA and DHA levels, are certainly required. In terms of performance supplements, the number one which comes to mind, which literally we would recommend to most people, is creatine monohydrate. Now, we want to have this 5 gram every day, or we want to probably have 20 gram in a loading phase if you are wanting to get some quick effects from creatine. Now, this can help repeated sprint ability, it can help improve lean muscle mass, it can help improve kind of cognitive performance such as concentration and memory. There is some beneficial effects even in the elderly in terms of increased bone mass and also muscle mass. It can help improve recovery after injury, helping retain muscle mass around the injured limb. And literally for creatine, now I almost tell everybody just to keep on it all the time. So 5 grams per day, every day. Even with a lot of our athletes now, we do keep them on it all the way up to a weigh-in. Now, there is potentially some research that it does hold kind of some water retention around 1% of our body weight, but this is only usually when you start taking it, and then usually it does peter out the longer you have it. So usually holding that water weight is not that much of an issue. So keeping it in almost all the way to the weigh-in can be required, and I do use this with some athletes. One, because it's going to help improve their performance, but also there is some research around actually reducing the risk of kind of traumatic brain injury and helping with concussion. And as we know, improving the health and safety of the boxers we work with is our prioritization. The next supplement that I can recommend to most athletes is beta-alanine. Now, this can help improve repeated sprint performance, and it has actually been shown in some specific boxing studies to help improve kind of punch frequency during a 3-minute round. Now, the side effect of beta-alanine is the tingles. So basically getting paresthesia to our skin and face. Now, this does put many athletes off. And what this does, it does reduce that adherence. So they won't reach that 6 grams per day that they need of beta-alanine over 6 weeks. So I would say if you are an athlete taking beta-alanine but not in this dosage, or you're struggling to do it because of these side effects, then don't take it because it's probably going to have no effect and you're probably wasting your money. However, improve your performance having 2 grams of beta-alanine with breakfast, 2 grams beta-alanine with lunch, 2 grams of beta-alanine with dinner. So having this with food and insulin is going to help increase it direct to the muscle to also reduce some of that paresthesia is going to be beneficial for increasing that supplement usage and also the benefits. Caffeine is another supplement that we would certainly recommend to quite a few of our athletes. Now, Grogic et al. In 2020, 2021, 2022 has done several meta-analysis and systematic reviews on improving anaerobic performance, improving aerobic performance, improving muscular endurance. Because of this, it can improve so many aspects of performance which is linked to boxing. We want to try and have around 3 milligrams per kilogram of caffeine around 45 minutes to an hour before, if we take it in the form of a drink. So even just having a double espresso can be a good natural intake of caffeine, or whether we use some kind of caffeine capsules or even in an energy gel. You can use caffeine gum. So we still want to try and get this around 3 milligrams per kilogram of caffeine in the form of gum and have this around 5 minutes before chewing vigorously to make sure we are increasing that effect of it working. Now, there is some also studies recently by Grogic and colleagues that actually shows having lower amounts than the 3 milligram per kilogram of caffeine can also improve performance. So having around 0.9 to 2 grams per kilogram. Now, if you are an athlete who doesn't take caffeine regularly, then what we would say is probably starting at the lower doses may be beneficial for you. The reason for this is you're probably still going to have an effect, but also you're going to have the less risk of increasing anxiety, sweaty palms, increased heart rate, what maybe you're not used to. Now, as I said, a side effect of caffeine is increased anxiety, and it can reduce sleep. So caffeine can stay in our system for 9 to 12 hours. So having this in evening sessions is probably not going to be required. So we would only recommend it to most of our athletes who are training before noon. The last supplement we would probably recommend for most of our athletes is dietary nitrates. So this can come mainly in the form of beetroot juice, but now there is different types of shots, whether it's done through natural kind of sources such as rhubarb, such as even, as I said, beetroot, rocket, spinach. You can get it in a non-natural form such as sodium nitrate, where the taste can be a bit better, which is going to improve compliance by athletes. Now, we want to try and have 400 milligram of dietary nitrates around 2.5 hours before our exercise. This can help improve our performance acutely. If you are a well-trained athlete, we probably need higher amounts than this. So this is where we would like our athletes to take it in a chronic dosage. So we would usually say taking it 1 to 2 times per day from 3 days before exercise, just to help increase that effect of increasing those dietary nitrates to our blood vessels, which is going to increase that oxidation. So then we can get more oxygen to our muscles to help improve our performance. Now, dietary nitrates has been shown to improve aerobic performance. It's been shown to improve muscular endurance and even some anaerobic performance. This is mainly done down at Andrew Jones's lab down in South England. As mentioned on all of the supplements, the key about taking supplements is the timing and also the dosage. Even if a supplement has been shown to work from the evidence, you still need to take it in that required dosage and timing. So making sure you're taking these, as I've stated previously, in the dosages and timings from kind of competition or training, or in a chronic dose such as beta-alanine for 6 weeks or creatine 5 grams per day. This is where this key kind of information also gets lost in many people. So they'll take a supplement thinking it works even though evidence is there, but they'll take it either in the wrong form, or they'll take it at the wrong time, or they won't load it properly. So it's really important that you do stick to these loading regimens and the dosage to make sure you get the best effect on your performance, but also health.
Okay guys, that's the end of this week's episode of the Boxing Science Podcast. Thank you very much for watching or listening, and thank you to Lee for answering the questions that you've provided around nutrition for boxing, a very, very important area. If you're not subscribed to the channel yet, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future content. Hopefully see you on the next episode of the Boxing Science Podcast.